This is one section of the exam where no pretense, no strategies, and no magic formula would ever work for you if you do not learn how to speak in French, period. If there's anyone out there who's telling you otherwise, they're lying to you, they're not your friend, unfollow them, never talk to them for the rest of your life, because there is no real magic formula or strategy or any kind of checklist that would help you clear this exam if you do not learn how to speak in French. As someone who sat this test himself, I can tell you from my personal experience that expression oral starts and ends in just moments. Before you enter the exam hall, the moment you start talking to the examiner, and the moment when the exam just gets over goes so fast that you would not have the mental headspace to execute a checklist or formulate a strategy, or have a pre-formulated strategy that would help you in the exam hall. In this video, I want to take the time to share all the strategies and techniques that I applied to learn how to speak French and pass the expression oral exam in my first attempt. So let's dive straight into it. When I was learning French, and even when I see new students learning French, I see a lot of times that learners learn vocabulary in isolation, and then they learn grammar in isolation, and then they try to combine the grammar that they have learned with the vocabulary that they have acquired and try to form sentences. Now, this is never going to work. The human brain is not capable of processing so much information all at the same time. Imagine this: you're trying to first remember the necessary vocabulary for the situation that you have acquired in a different context. Then you're trying to learn and understand the grammar that would go with it, and then you're also trying to combine all these aspects of vocabulary and grammar at the same time. And if this is not enough, you're also trying to speak the sentences right in the same moment. That's four things for the human brain to tackle all at once, and that's just too much information, too much processing, and the human brain is not evolved for multitasking. I did a lot of research on this, that we as human beings cannot work on cognitively demanding tasks which are scattered in different contexts and make them happen all at once. Even if it was to work, and even if it was possible for the human brain to process this, first you'll have to always stop and think, a sentence, form a sentence which would take at least 2 to 3 seconds, and then speak every time. If you take a pause of 2 to 3 seconds every time that you start speaking, there would be too many gaps in the sentences for it to be called fluent French. By definition, if you have to stop and then think again what type of sentence, what exactly do I have to say in this situation, you are not fluent by definition. Imagine this in your own mother tongue or any other language that you're already fluent in. I'm speaking in English right now, I'm looking at the camera, and I'm only thinking about the ideas that I have to talk about. I'm not thinking whether should I be using past sentences, or should I be using present continuous tense, should I be using conditional tense, or even like whatever tenses there are in English, I don't even know about them. Words naturally flow in the order of their ideas, and I don't have to think about individual vocabulary words, grammar, and then I'm not even combining them together. I'm just speaking because that is how I've heard the language, and that is how I've naturally acquired the language. Now you're already fluent in basic French, and I'm very sure of that, because everyone knows how to say "Comment vas-tu?" to ask a question like "How are you?" or "Je vais bien, merci." I'm good, thank you. Why exactly do these phrases come out of us like naturally, whereas for other more complex sentences we have to think a lot before about grammar and about vocabulary? The reason why they come out well together is because we have acquired the entire phrase itself. The idea of asking a human being how are you doing simply means comment vas-tu or comment allez-vous in French, and you are able to speak that sentence very clearly all at once because you have naturally acquired how to use the phrase itself. Imagine this: if you were to say como as an individual vocabulary word, and then you have to think about, oh, this is a present continuous tense or a present tense, then you need to use the present form of the verb aller, and then you also have to think that is it a formal context, is it an informal context, and accordingly use tu or vous, and then change the form of the verb. That's just too much information, and you don't need to do that. You can simply acquire the entire French language just like you have acquired comment vas-tu or comment allez-vous or je vais bien merci or je m'appelle XYZ. This is the approach to acquire the entire language. Now that we know that learning phrases is the key to French fluency, we can't just go ahead and acquire any kind of phrases, right? We have to ensure that our phrases are number one, error free, and number two, they always come from authentic use of French. Most English language learners, when they're trying to learn French or any other foreign language, they try to translate the English sentences that they know already into French by using French vocabulary and French grammar in place of the English vocabulary and grammar that they know. And this can be disastrous because languages are parallel concepts. Now, what do I mean by that? Languages are parallel concepts in the sense that each and every language does not follow the same logic or the same thought process or like the same kind of rules when words are glued together in terms of grammar. To give you a very simple example that you already know of, when we say I am well in English, it does not literally translate into je suis bien in French. In fact, in French we say je vais bien, which translates into I am going well in English. So if someone says I'm going well in English, that would not make a lot of sense, but that is exactly the way to communicate in French. We say je vais bien. To give you another example, which is a little more advanced than this, is that when I say I miss you in English, that translates into je te manque in French. But then if I say je te manque in French, that is absolutely wrong because the French way of saying I miss you is tu me manques, and that literally translates into you are missing to me. And that doesn't make any sense in English, right? But that makes complete sense in French because French follows a different structure, a different kind of lexical reasoning or lexical logic as a language compared to English. So when you're trying to acquire phrases, ensure that you're mimicking the French speaker and not translating your English sentences into French and then trying to learn them. Because that can lead you to roads which can be very frustrating because all the time like a French speaker would try to correct you and you will be like, but this is the way to say it, right? This is how we speak it in English and I'm using the right vocabulary and I'm applying the right grammar concepts. But what you're missing is that you're missing the French lexical or the lexical logic of French, which is very unique and is only found in French. But then the question arises, how do I start mimicking French speakers? Like, where do I find them? Well, the answer to that is very simple. You start listening to authentic French speakers from various sources, which brings me to my third point in the video, which is listen like crazy. When I was learning French, I would spend easily 3 to 4 hours at least per day just listening to content in different paces from different places and then trying to understand what exactly are they saying and not just understand what they're saying for improving my comprehension orale, which is the listening test, but also to acquire phrases from them just the way they are speaking. I watch Netflix shows, I listen to live radio from Paris, live radio from Montreal, I listen to podcasts on Spotify. I was also using a lot of learning material targeted towards French learners, like for example, Conversations course by Ollie Richards. I was using pre-defined audio files which I found online from like random different sources. And then, I was trying to combine everything together from various angles, from various perspectives to acquire phrases just like the French speakers would speak them. Listening and speaking are connected to each other just like reading and writing are also connected to each other. Now, when we were growing up in school, we were told by our teachers that you should read a lot to become a better writer. So we read a lot of books from J.K. Rowling, Roald Dahl, and like different other authors. And that exposed us to a lot of rich lexical understanding of the English language. That exposed us to a lot of great vocabulary. It also gave us ready-made opening sentences to different passages and paragraphs. And when it was our turn to write those same kind of passages and essays, we just had like pre-made sentences ready at our disposal that we had read in those books, and we could simply deploy them in the essays and the paragraphs that we were asked to write ourselves. The exact same logic applies to listening and speaking. When you listen to a lot of content, your brain subconsciously absorbs a lot of information about what is the best phrases, and then you can simply deploy that in your own speaking test or even when you're just practicing with the italki teacher. And trust me on this, you would surprise yourself with the kind of phrases and the kind of vocabulary you start using once you start acquiring these pre-made sentences from original authentic French speakers. And like your pace of growth when it comes to being a speaker of the French language would tremendously be accelerated, because you're no longer caught up in thinking about grammar rules or just trying to conjure a vocabulary from like a book that you have read. Everything is kind of pre-formulated, and it's just the idea that you have to think about, and the words will flow naturally from it. Also, research suggests that when you listen to a lot of auditory material, it attunes your brain subconsciously to the rhythm of the language. So basically, what that helps you with is understanding how different pronunciations of different words glue into each other as sentences. And this is particularly helpful for liaison in French. I know that a lot of you, and even I till date, like struggle with how to carry forward the S from the last word into like this word, because it starts with a vowel and like all of that. But it becomes much more natural and much easier to form liaisons once you start listening to French, because that's the magic of your subconscious brain. It just acquires like a sponge about how that word should sound with the previous word, because you've listened to it so many times in different contexts. And you don't even have to worry about when the liaison does not happen, because your brain knows subconsciously, or even consciously for that matter, that this is like the kind of scenario where the liaison is not supposed to happen, so I will not form it. Everything becomes much effortless when you listen to the right kind of auditory material, because that like really gives you a leg up compared to a person who's just like getting that information from a book and is trying to now consciously force himself or herself to like form that liaison, or like just bring out that authentic pronunciation of French. Like that sounds really unnatural. And if your French examiner, for like god forbid, is like a French person, they would be really put off by like the kind of voices and like the kind of tonalities that you're talking about. For sure, like they're trained people, so they'll not judge you or like mark you down for it, but it would definitely not help you make a best or like a good impression. Now, a great resource for acquiring the best phrase and also the rhythm of the language is again the Inner French podcast. I've been talking about the Inner French podcast in a lot of my other videos, and I'm absolutely sure that this is a great resource even for Expressio Ohal, because the rhythm of the podcast, like the pace at which Hugo Couton talks, and also like the rhythm with which he talks in the language, is absolutely ideal for you to mimic for your own Expressio Ohal exam. Because if you talk slowly, and that too with a certain rhythm in the language, that allows you more time to think at the time of the exam, but also create space for the examiner to understand what you're trying to say, even if your pronunciation is not the best pronunciation or like the most authentic French pronunciation. And this brings me to the fourth and the final point in this video, which is talk slowly but at a constant rhythm in the language to ace that Expression Ohal exam. Like seriously, when you talk a little slowly compared to a French speaker, like it gives you extra milliseconds before you utter each word, and those milliseconds are enough for the brain to just figure out the last part of, let's say you're talking about le monde, which is the word in French, and it is also used in the phrase tout le monde. So if you're unsure for some reason that what is the gender of the word monde, you have those extra milliseconds to think about it before you utter the word if you speak a little slowly compared to a real French speaker. And also, the TEF Canada exam does not reward you more points because you are speaking faster or at the same pace compared to a French native. The TEF Canada exam is judging you on the correctness and the authenticity of your French. So if you're not getting more points for speaking faster, then there's no point in speaking faster. Just speak a little slowly. In fact, I would say mimic the pace at which Hugo Couton talks in during his own Inner French podcast, and I'll link it in the description below so that you definitely have a reference point. And talk a little slowly compared to a French speaker. You'll have the extra time to think about, like the last pieces of gender or grammar, or if you have uttered, let's say, a word, a phrase like je dirais que, which invokes a subjunctive, then you have the extra milliseconds to change the form of the following word to the subjunctive form. These were my top tips for learning how to speak in French much faster and be extra prepared for your expression oral exam. This is the first video in a larger series where I will be talking more about more science-backed techniques, my own experience of learning how to speak in French, and also exam-specific strategies for the day of the exam. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. What they try to do is that they try to literally translate the English sentence into French using using French